Okay, so that was the first part in this app, how we download data from a server. The second part is that when we actually found the information, what we're going to do, we're going to call this function called parse JSON. In this function, we receive what? We receive the array of objects. Since it's an array of objects, here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to convert it into this format. An attribute and a value. Attribute and a value. All right? So I say if the data that I receive is converted into this dictionary, array of dictionaries, if you will, continue. We define this object called store to house the data temporarily. Every time we read a record, we create an object of this. So what do we do inside that loop? For every record that we received in that array, every object that we receive, I create an object locally. That object will have in it all the attributes that were defined in that class stored. For example, it will have the store name, description, latitude, longitude, and so forth. Latitude and longitude, notice they are float. Name and description and phone are strings. If I go back to the table view controller, what do? I search in the array for these attributes. If in that dictionary, look for store ID. These values depend on what you receive from the server. So if you look at this, I have store ID, store name, latitude, and longitude. All these has to be similar. So store ID, I have a store ID. Now the data that I'm getting is a string. So I'm converting it to a string, make sure that it is a string, and I print it out. Same thing with the store name. Find me my store name, and here I'm not printing it out. All I'm doing is that assigning the store name in the object store to the value that I've received. Okay, here I do give me the store image name as a string and assign it to the object store image name. And here what happens is that I get the latitude. Now the latitude comes to me as a string, but because in the object it is a float, I convert it to a float. All right, this is how we convert it to a float. If it was an integer, I would put an int here. Same thing with, or a double, I can put a double in here, depending on how you define it in the class. Same thing with the latitude. So after I find all my information, updated the object, I add that object to the array that we defined above. So you do this for all the record that you receive. By the time you get out, then you will have information in that stored list. You will have records. What do I do with that record, with these records? I ask the table view controller to reload the data. And how you do it, you say table view, reload my data. But I do this, how do I do this? I do this in the background. I do it, say, look, operation q.main, add operation, do it in the background so your screen still moves, but you're doing it it would reload the data in the background. So that is all that you do in this parse JSON. Again, in your case, if you have your own example, you copy this, you modify the fields, and it depends on the array list that you have here. You can define, if it's different array, you change it to that array name. All right, so that is how we parse the data. So in the load record now, in this cell for record, now it would recall this again, update the table view, and then update the screen. Let's run it and see what happens. I'll show you the different parts. When you're running it, here's my table. Initially, it's blank. Now that is the first part that you saw. This is that first part that you saw in here, which is here. Convert the data into string. Do you see this part? This is that part. Convert it to a string into and print it so I can actually view it, what it looks like. I'm making sure that I got the data correctly. What about this second part? The second part is that this part here, convert it to JSON and print out the JSON data. And this is that part. Notice how the two are different. This one is just a string. This one is actually organized data into in the format of JSON. You have the attribute, and here are the objects, array of objects inside that attribute. All right. The last part in here is when we click on this part. If we click on the details of this, it would take me to here. Now it gives me some details. All right. Now how do we do that? In the detail view controller, here's my detail view controller. What do? I define my outlets. I have the object that I'm going to receive from the view controller, the table view controller, and in the load, view did load, I update the screen with the information that I got from that object. That is all. This is a working example. It's very useful. It has many applications, and it follows the same structure. You have a web service, you have a server, you have a database, and it has data. You want to get that data, so you call it within your app, you receive the data, you parse it out, you display it on the screen. All right? We are done with this example. All right?